Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, I want to talk about the YCS Dortmund because it is a new meta for the TCG, and an honestly very interesting one, given the fact that, well, given the top cut of the YCS, that basically was the only YCS post-Banlist, tier is arguably the best deck. But as you can tell by the numbers here, there's still a lot of up in the air choices that you can make. Unchained saw some really good representation as well, and Dragon Link as well, which literally just got hit almost just as much as Tier did on that last ban list. But as we can see, there's no Kashtira or anything like that. So I just wanted to quickly talk about the top cut and more specifically talk about the tournament as a whole and kind of what comes from the new YCS for the TCG. Now, this obviously was a pretty up-in-the-air meta, lots of different decks that you could play. A lot of people were saying Unchained was the best deck going into this, and I would agree with that. However, Tier Limited did have that better representation. Let's actually go back over to YGO Pro so that we can actually see more easily what did end up topping. Obviously, Rika ended up winning with Vanquish Soul coming in second. Honestly, Rika just in Europe will always be able to have the opponent just mess up in the finals. It's guaranteed. Yeah, if you want to win in Europe, just play Rika. There you go. It works nowhere else, just in Europe. Good luck with that. Hopefully that works for you. But yeah, the rest of it is actually pretty interesting. Vanquish Soul and Rika obviously taking up top spots, but then in the top 8, I know that there was 2 tiers, even though there's only 1 here. I also know, I'm pretty sure that there were 2 Flunders, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So I don't know which one got to top 4, but yeah, that pretty much shows you how some of the decks appear. But at the very least, in top 8, there was 2 tier limits. We have the Unchained, we have Pearly, we have Flunder. We have things like more Dragon Link in top 16, Dragon Link in top 16, more Unchained. Despia, this is a Despia Chimera, I believe. No, I think the other one was a branded Despia that was in top 4, if I'm not mistaken. I believe they played against Vanquish Soul. No. It was top 8, and they played against a Vanquish Soul player. Can't remember. Doesn't really matter. The point is that the meta is pretty diverse. But yeah, let's just kind of go over some of the lists here. Not a lot of Sprite. I believe there's just Samir, who is a god of Sprite, and I think basically that's it in terms of Sprite representation. Makonko, so weird. But Makonko, this list we actually do have to talk about because it is a very, very interesting list for this YCS. It didn't end up getting top 32, and yes, it's Makonko, but it's also just Infernoble at the same time. It's very weird. It's basically Neospace Connector does the full Isolde line in order to send a lot of these cards specifically in order to facilitate this weird line that allows you to end on Apollosa specifically, on top of some of the other Makonko cards that add like protection for you. And that's kind of it. That's kind of all that the deck does. It sets up some of the Makonko spells and traps, specifically these two, while also allowing you to end on like an Ohime and stuff like that. It was very interesting and a very different build that I wanted to bring to light, because this is probably the best way to play both Makonko and Infernoble going forward. Maybe. I would imagine that if this does see more representation, that people would be more prepared for it and know how to actually play around it, so I don't think it would do as well, but it is still worth noting. Yeah, just lots of tier, just a ton of tier, which is honestly quite surprising. Lots of tier in the top 32, I mean, even in the top 16, etc., which is, the most surprising bit. Things like Unchained as well, and as we can see here, this is what a more standard Unchained list is going to look like. Yeah, this is pretty much almost exactly what you would expect from an Unchained list. The thrust targets. Here they're main decking the Herald of the Abyss. I've seen people main deck Harpy's Feather Duster instead to out things like Labyrinth or what have you, or heck, even the Mirror Match. So all things considered, pretty standard here for Unchained, and yeah, just all in all, pretty interesting. Obviously, we don't have the sprite list here, but there's that. Lots of different tier engines as well. Some people playing heroes, some people not playing heroes. Everyone is obviously playing the Ishizu stuff as well. Yeah, but that's kind of it. We don't have a lot of the deck lists because the event is so new. But yeah. Also, Manadimian, as we can see here, was also pretty highly represented. We have the Branded being highly represented. We have Flu being highly represented, and then Manadimian was pretty high up there. So yeah, basically it just this is the one with Revolution Synchron. I don't think all of them were playing Revolution Synchron. I think some of them were. I know a few of them were playing multiple of the orbs instead to get that special summon instead of the Revolution Synchron. So there's that. But it's just kind of a pile of all of the good Kashtira field spells specifically. I believe they're playing. Yeah, here they're playing 4 different field spells. The Pearl Rhino, the Reichphobia, the Wraith Soth, and of course the Peaceful Planet. So yeah, lots of different field spells, and that's basically the whole thing, is you cycle through a whole bunch of field spells. This one does happen to end on the... no. They're not actually going for the Crimson line here. They're actually just going for like Despotter Baron lines and stuff like that, multiple level 10s as their main combo pieces, which is pretty powerful, all things considered. Having Baron, Despotter, and Changing, which I don't want to say often happened, but it did happen quite a few times. So there's that to make note of. And Endymion is a very interesting deck. It's one of those things where if you are if you're side decking for a deck like this with things like Dark Ruler, then it's not as useful. I think a lot of Droplet is also available now. I think people are playing this, so this kind of outs a lot of those boards as well, but not nearly as effectively. So something to consider. Also, Virtual World made top 64. I don't know how, but they did. I do know this list, and I do know the player. They ended up doing pretty well. They were on one of the feature matches, and yeah, it's a very interesting list, and it's pretty cool. So yeah, just lots of, I mean, overall, just because of the we'll talk about Despia in a second, but because of the removal of a Rise Heart from the format, a lot of these other decks were able to perform. Notably, Vanquish Soul actually did very well in this event, mostly due to the fact, or I should say it did go pretty far, mostly due to the fact that it could play a myriad of hand traps that happened to be pretty good against a wide variety and a large number of different decks, meaning that the main deck was basically allowed to beat a whole bunch of different decks without really committing to anything in particular. And then having the side deck options more readily available for a wide variety of strategies as well is very, very strong. So Vanquish Soul just having a kind of just a lucky run as well was pretty cool. Same thing with Rika, though. I wouldn't say that these two are any better, even though, runner-up and first place in an event is pretty nice, especially an event so big. I think this is one of those things where it's like, if either of these become a deck that is good, it is going to be immediately shut down by side deck options. Like, for example, Rika doesn't really have a great way of dealing with back row, and also can be easily dealt with by things like Dark Ruler No More, or a Lightning Storm, or stuff like that, where it's not exactly the hardest deck to beat. Also, if you just win all of the die rolls, Rika is good, but if you don't win the die rolls, Rika's not very good. So, and Vanquish Soul just dies to like every hand trap. So there's that. So I wouldn't necessarily say that these are indicative of what is expected to be good. So there's that. I would more so look at this number here and look at these representations. However, I do think that with more people preparing for tier, I do expect it to see significantly less play, or at least significantly less representation at top cuts and the like, given the fact that being able to beat tier is something that we are expected to know at this point, or at least the players do know how to beat it at the top cuts. On top of that, more decks are more likely to play things like Abyss Dweller to be able to beat Unchained and tier, so that becomes even more problematic. And that was one of the big things that actually ended up getting Vanquish Soul into the finals, was being able to go for the Abyss Dweller line in a final game to actually just beat the tier player and move on from that. Here we have the branded Despia Chimera, which is a pretty standard. How do I say it? It's a pretty normal list now, or at least maybe not this build in particular, but at the very least, branded Despia Chimera is a deck that is more or less expected to see in the metagame. So seeing this is pretty cool. I think this one is playing a lot more of a like branded fusion pile, basically. They're playing like the Edgem chain in order to search it out with the Fight for Patchwork to get an additional target. They're playing the 1 polymerization. They're playing the only 2 Chimera fusions, but they're playing things like fusion deployments to go for Blazing Cartesia, which most people are cutting. They're also like main decking things like Teakboo and the like, which is very interesting. So yeah, pretty interesting in this list at the very least. Also side decking the 1 Masquerade, I just saw that, which is very, very funny. But yeah, very standard to be running all of the illusions and the like. Very strong cards, and I would say that is pretty much expected. But all things considered, what I think we can most notably take away from this event is that Tier is still here to play. Unless we get another ban list in the TCG, I would expect Tier to at least be a top competing deck. I don't think it's going to necessarily be the deck to beat. I still think that is probably Unchained, but even with that being said, Tier is still very strong. I think the main reason that it did so well in this event in particular was due to the fact that Tier was not really expected, I think, by a lot of the lower level players, or more specifically the people who weren't like having their ear to the ground, really focusing on what was going to be expected to be the best deck going into this event. But I also think that similar to Unchained, when Unchained first started up, I do think that it having that surprise factor made it a lot stronger than a lot of people were thinking that it would be. You know, obviously it didn't win the event, but it did do pretty well, all things considered. You know, 2 in top 8 is pretty strong, and you know, most representation in top 64, again, is very strong. Now, with that being said, as people prepare for this deck a little bit more and side deck in additional cards like Dimension Shifter or just whatever it may be to out not only this but also Unchained, I think that this becomes significantly more problematic for Tier, and I do think it will drop a bit. Dragon Link, I also see it actually just continuing to live on pretty well. As we see, there aren't too many that did too well in terms of how far they went in the tournament, but it's not like they were doing poorly by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, yeah, the 1 Magnuma does hurt, and the 1 Chaos Space also does hurt, but they still have all of the other Bestials in order to play out of the hand, lots of space for non-engine, as well as a wide variety of normal summons that do get them into a large, full combo on top of that. So I wouldn't necessarily say that this is a deck that is written off even post-Banlist, and I would say that a lot of people probably underestimated this deck. So I think that's another takeaway from this. Branded, really, it's always going to perform poorly. I think if people are prepared for it, it's just going to get worse and worse for it. So there's that. Flunder is here to stay, and Manadimian is probably the best of the combo decks, at least at the moment, given the fact that I think it is just more difficult to actually play through the end boards as opposed to something like a Rika or an Infernoble or what have you. But more importantly than that, I think Manadimian also has the ability to go second very, very well. Oftentimes people aren't ending on these 6, 7, 8 negate boards, but instead are ending on fewer interruptions, but more powerful interruptions. And when every single card from Manadimian basically needs to be answered, it causes a lot of issues with, you know, forcing out those interactions, right? If a boss monster hits the field, you're probably already off to a bad start. So there's that. All things considered, good event. The finals were really boring. That's it. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, I like us very much, so appreciate it. And if you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.